What would you do if you woke up one morning to find your front yard had been declared community property by an HOA you never even signed up for? I didn't think something like that could happen, until I moved into my new home, a cozy little house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It wasn't the most luxurious place, but it was mine, and after years of apartment living, I was finally free to do whatever I wanted with my own space. No upstairs neighbors stomping at odd hours. No paper-thin walls. Just a backyard, a front porch, and a fresh start. I knew there was a homeowners association in the neighborhood, but I never thought much of it. My property wasn't part of the HOA, which meant their rules didn't apply to me. That was the deal. I had checked, double-checked, even triple-checked before closing. So when I heard my neighbors talking about their absurd fines, one woman got penalized for having an off-white mailbox instead of HOA-approved beige, I just counted myself lucky. I figured I'd be left alone. Then I met Janet. Janet was the HOA president, and the moment I saw her, I understood why people whispered about her like she was the neighborhood boogeyman. She had that tight-lipped, overly cheerful expression that didn't quite reach her eyes, the kind of forced politeness that felt more like a warning than a greeting. It took exactly 2 weeks before she showed up at my door, clipboard in hand, her smile stretched a little too wide. "Hello. I'm Janet, the HOA president, and I'm here for a quick property inspection." I blinked, convinced I had misheard. "Sorry, what?" "Just a routine check," she chirped, already glancing past me toward my backyard like she owned the place. "I'll need to make sure everything's up to community standards." I frowned. "I'm not part of the HOA." The way her smile faltered for just a second told me she already knew that. But she recovered quickly. "Well, you should be," she said matter-of-factly. "Regardless, I need to ensure your property maintains the neighborhood's aesthetic." That was the moment I realized Janet wasn't just nosy, she was a control freak with an inflated sense of authority. "No," I said, stepping outside and closing the door behind me. "This is my property. You're not inspecting anything." Janet's expression hardened, but she didn't argue. "Not yet." Instead, she clicked her pen, scribbled something onto her clipboard, and met my eyes with a thin smile. "We'll see about that." I watched her march down my driveway, her heels clicking against the pavement like a ticking time bomb. I should have seen it coming. I should have known that was only the beginning. The next morning, I stepped outside to grab the newspaper and noticed something taped to my front door. A bright yellow violation notice, bold and impossible to miss. My stomach tightened before I even read it. Notice of HOA infraction. The list of offenses was laughable. Unauthorized garden modifications, fence height violation, improperly placed potted plants. I let out a dry chuckle. This had to be a joke. I wasn't even part of the HOA. There was no reason for them to have any authority over my property. Yet here I was, staring at an official-looking document threatening escalating fines if I didn't comply with HOA regulations within 7 days. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer, Carl, who answered with his usual no-nonsense tone. I explained the situation, half expecting him to tell me to ignore it. Instead, he sighed. "This is a classic scare tactic. She knows she can't enforce it, but she's banking on you not knowing that. Don't give her an inch." That was all I needed to hear. I tossed the notice in the trash, determined to go about my day as if it had never arrived. But Janet wasn't done. Over the next few days, I started noticing her car driving past my house more frequently. At first, I told myself it was a coincidence, until I spotted her parked across the street, sitting in her sedan with her phone out, clearly taking pictures of my property. She wasn't even trying to be subtle about it. The first time, I simply stared at her, waiting for her to realize she'd been caught. But instead of looking embarrassed or driving off, she simply tilted her head, smirked, and wrote something in her clipboard before pulling away. Then things got worse. One of my friends, Mike, stopped by for a quick visit one evening. He parked in front of my house, and we spent about 10 minutes chatting on my porch before he left. The next morning, Mike sent me a picture of a $250 violation fine from the HOA. "Dude," he wrote. "What the hell is this?" I scrolled through the fine, dumbfounded. Unauthorized visitor parking. The HOA was claiming that my guest had violated community parking regulations. That was when I really started to get pissed. I did some research and found out that Janet had no legal right to enforce parking restrictions on public roads. The HOA didn't own the streets. But that hadn't stopped her from slapping fines on anyone who visited my house. By the time I had calmed down enough to think clearly, I decided to call the city to formally confirm that the street was public property. They confirmed it immediately. I had all the proof I needed that Janet was overstepping her bounds. That night, I decided to document everything. I set up a security camera facing my front yard. If Janet was going to keep up this game, I was going to have evidence. But Janet was already one step ahead. The next morning, I turned on the sink to wash my hands and nothing came out. At first, I thought it was a neighborhood outage, until I checked my mailbox and found a water shutoff notice. It took me 2 calls to the water company before I got a straight answer. "Your account was flagged for unpaid HOA fees," the customer service rep explained. I clenched my jaw. "I don't have HOA fees. I'm not part of the HOA." A long pause. Then, the rep hesitated. "The request came from your homeowners association." That was it. I didn't care if Janet thought she could fine me into submission. I was not going to sit back and let her mess with my utilities. I called Carl again, and this time, he didn't even try to calm me down. "She's committing fraud now. I'll handle the legal side, but I need you to stay sharp. She's not just harassing you anymore, she's trying to force you into compliance by any means necessary." By the time I had my water restored later that day, I knew one thing for certain. Janet had declared war. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside had me reaching for my phone to check the security feed. Janet had escalated beyond petty fines, she was now messing with my utilities, and there was no telling what she'd do next. I woke up groggy the next morning and stepped outside to grab the mail. But as soon as I saw my backyard gate wide open, every bit of exhaustion vanished. The lock, which had been perfectly intact the night before, was cut clean through, the metal pieces lying in the grass like discarded scraps. My heart pounded as I scanned the yard. Nothing was stolen, but that wasn't the point. Someone had been on my property. I bolted inside and pulled up the footage from my security camera, hoping I'd see a raccoon or some random passerby. Instead, I saw exactly what I feared. A figure lurking near my fence around 2 a.m. The footage was dark, grainy, but the outline was clear, a person standing there, watching. And then, as if they had all the time in the world, they pulled out a tool, cut the lock, pushed open the gate, and walked away. I called Carl immediately. He didn't hesitate. "File a police report. Now." An officer arrived within the hour. He took one look at the footage and nodded grimly. Definitely intentional. But unless we can get a clear face, it's hard to prove who it was. We both knew. But proving it was another matter. That afternoon, I got a knock on my door. Not Janet this time, someone else from the HOA board. An older woman named Maggie, one of the quieter members I hadn't paid much attention to. She glanced over her shoulder before stepping in close, lowering her voice. "I'm going to keep this short," she said. "You're not the only one who has a problem with Janet." That got my attention. Maggie didn't mince words. Janet had been abusing her power for years, bending rules, using HOA funds for personal expenses, even hiring private landscapers to maintain only her own property. But because she controlled the board and had enough influence, no one had been able to stop her. "She's more paranoid than ever," Maggie whispered. "She's losing control, and that makes her dangerous." I should have felt relieved knowing I had an ally, but instead, my stomach twisted. If Janet was desperate, that meant she wasn't done yet. And I was right. The next evening, I was in my living room when there was a sharp knock on my door. I opened it, expecting another bogus HOA notice. Instead, I was greeted by two animal control officers. "Sir, we received a report about a dangerous, unlicensed dog on your property." My stomach dropped. "Excuse me?" They handed me a notice. Formal complaint. It claimed my puppy was an aggressive, unregistered animal that posed a threat to the neighborhood. I almost laughed. My dog, a 6-month-old golden retriever, had barely learned how to bark, let alone threaten anyone. But as I read the report, my hands clenched. The complaint was anonymous, but I didn't need a name to know where it came from. Janet. I forced myself to stay calm. "My dog is fully vaccinated and registered. I have the paperwork." The officers nodded, clearly just doing their jobs. "If that's the case, then there won't be an issue. But given the nature of the complaint, we'll need to verify everything." I let them inside, showed them the records, and within minutes, they confirmed that my dog was completely legal. "Sorry about this," one of them muttered as he left. "We get false reports sometimes." False reports. I already had the footage of Janet staking out my property before the officers arrived. And now, I had proof that she was actively trying to weaponize city services against me. She had crossed the line. I spent the rest of the night gathering every piece of evidence I had: falsified fines, security footage of her stalking my house, the bogus HOA violations, and now this report from animal control. Janet thought she was untouchable. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. By the time the sun rose, I had everything I needed. Janet had spent weeks trying to push me around, but now I had proof of her corruption. The fines, the fake violation notices, the trespassing, the intimidation, she had escalated at every turn, and now she had tried to have my dog taken away. That was her mistake. She thought I'd back down. Instead, she had just handed me everything I needed to bring her down. I compiled every document, every screenshot, every piece of security footage, and put together a detailed report of her harassment. I wasn't just going after her in private, I was going to make this public. By mid-morning, I sent a mass email to every homeowner in the HOA. Attached were a timeline of Janet's actions, from her first inspection to the attempt to shut off my utilities. Screenshots of the bogus fines, especially the ones she issued to guests for parking on public streets. The security footage of her repeatedly stalking my house and snapping pictures. The falsified animal control complaint, with my dog's verified registration proving she had lied. Carl's legal analysis showing that Janet had been committing fraud by sending violation notices to non-HOA properties. I kept it professional, but I made sure the message was loud and clear: Janet had abused her power for too long, and it was time for the HOA to answer for it. I hit send. Within 30 minutes, my phone started blowing up. Neighbors started responding. Some were shocked, some were furious, and a few even admitted that they had been victims of Janet's overreach too. One man told me she had fined him for putting up an unapproved holiday decoration in his window. Another said she had threatened to tow his wife's car from their own driveway. It wasn't just me. Janet had been harassing people for years. By noon, the HOA board called for an emergency meeting. I showed up that evening, and the room was already packed. Homeowners sat in the folding chairs, murmuring to each other, flipping through printed copies of the email I had sent. At the front, Janet stood stiffly, her jaw clenched as she watched me walk in. The second I took my seat, she launched into her usual self-righteous speech. "This is nothing more than a smear campaign," she snapped, her voice laced with venom. "This is a personal attack from a man who refuses to follow community guidelines." I let her talk. I wanted her to. Because the moment she finished, I stood up and calmly set a thick manila folder on the table in front of the board. "Everything I sent out is in here," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I have security footage, documents, and legal analysis proving that Janet has been abusing her authority in misusing HOA funds. She's issued fines on property she has no jurisdiction over. She's illegally reported people to animal control. She's even shut off utilities under false pretenses. And let's not forget, she trespassed onto my property and cut my gate lock." A murmur swept through the room. I saw Maggie exchange a knowing glance with another board member. Janet's face flushed red, but she forced a tight smile. "I have done nothing outside my authority." I pulled out a copy of the city's zoning regulations and HOA bylaws. I flipped to a highlighted section. "This is public record," I said. "It proves that the HOA has no authority over non-member properties, no control over public streets, and no legal right to enforce any of the fines you've been handing out." I turned another page and slid it across the table. "And this? This is a record of HOA expenses. Funny thing, I noticed that thousands of dollars have gone missing over the years. But somehow, your landscaping bill always gets paid on time." Silence. Someone in the back whispered, "Jesus." Another board member cleared his throat. "Janet, is this true?" Janet stiffened, but the board member continued. "You've been using HOA funds for personal expenses?" Janet's expression flickered, just for a second. It was subtle, but I saw it. She knew she was cornered. "I refuse to dignify these baseless accusations," she hissed, her voice rising in anger. But it was too late. The damage was done. Maggie stood up. "I propose an immediate vote to remove Janet as HOA president." Before Janet could even argue, hands shot up across the room. One after another. Almost the entire board. I leaned back in my chair, watching as Janet realized she had lost. Her face twisted with rage, but she couldn't fight it. The vote was unanimous. She had been officially removed. As I stood to leave, Janet glared at me, her eyes filled with hate. "You think this is over?" she whispered, low enough that only I could hear. "You'll regret this." I didn't flinch. "No, Janet," I said quietly. "You will." I walked out of that meeting knowing one thing for certain. Janet had finally lost her power. But something told me she wasn't done yet. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. Janet was out, her reign of petty tyranny finally over. Or so I thought. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed with a security alert. Motion detected, backyard gate. My stomach clenched as I tapped into the live feed. The grainy image loaded, and there, clear as day, was Janet, crouched by my fence with a pair of bolt cutters in her hand. Adrenaline kicked in. I grabbed my phone and called the police. "She's here," I said, my voice steady despite the anger burning in my chest. "She's on my property right now." The officers arrived in under 10 minutes, but Janet was still there, fiddling with the gate lock as if she could somehow undo everything that had happened. The moment she saw the flashing lights, she froze. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. I stepped outside as the officers approached her. "Ma'am, step away from the property." Janet straightened up, her face shifting from panic to righteous indignation. "This is my neighborhood. He's the one who—" "Ma'am, you're trespassing," the officer interrupted. "And we have you on camera." That shut her up. The next few minutes were a blur. They placed her in handcuffs, read her rights, and as they led her to the squad car, she turned to me with pure venom in her eyes. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You'll regret this." But for once, her threats felt hollow. The charges, trespassing, harassment, attempted vandalism, were enough to ensure Janet wouldn't be bothering anyone for a long time. The HOA, now under new leadership, immediately distanced themselves from her. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood felt different. Lighter. Freer. People started talking to each other again. Those who had once tiptoed around Janet's ridiculous rules and now laughed about them, relieved to be done with her nonsense. Maggie, now interim HOA president, assured me that they were working to undo the damage Janet had done. The fines, the parking nonsense, the ridiculous restrictions, were scrapping it all. I had never been part of the HOA, but for the first time, I actually believed it was there to serve the community, not control it. One afternoon, I hosted a small gathering at the open field, the same one Janet had tried to micromanage. Families came, neighbors brought their dogs, kids ran around freely. No HOA violations, no citations. Just people enjoying their space. As I stood there watching, I couldn't help but wonder, how many other neighborhoods had a Janet lurking in their midst, terrorizing homeowners just because they could? So tell me, have you ever felt powerless against HOA or HOA? Rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.